Hello everybody and welcome back to Space Engine. Now this is actually my second time recording this because I recorded it and got through 21 minutes of fun-filled episode and then realized my mic was muted the entire time. And what made it more distressing was in the episode itself, I even said, my mic's probably muted because whenever I have a good episode, something bad always happens. And I was right, that's what happened. Oh well, instead of complaining about it, I'm going to, well, still complain about it, but at least, just redo it, get back to it, it's whatever. I may sound a little hoarse, throughout this episode. That's because everyone in my house is currently sick, and I was also choking on a cookie, like, a minute ago, so, but I have tea next to me, so, Honestly, I have, like, this lemon ginger tea, and when you, like, dip cookies in it, it's so good. That whole idea of, like, the British idea of tea and biscuits, love it. Fantastic. 10 out of 10. Would recommend. Anyways, let's get to this. I still have this here, right? I do! This was the only place I was asked to go. Forgot what it looked like. Oh, right, this one. Yeah, that's right, because I was looking at it, and I'm like, it's an eyeball planet, but it's positioned wrong. And, like, what an eyeball planet is it's basically this. You have one side's frozen over, one side's not, and usually the day-night terminator follows the edge here, but in this case it's kind of weird and it doesn't do that. And these planets are really cool because they offer an interesting habitability situation, because generally you won't think to find life in the frozen extremes, and you won't find life in the warm, hot side. Because these planets are usually tidally locked when they do this. So the best place to look is on the Terminator. The day-night Terminator, that is. Where it's kind of temperate. And it's just lovely. What kind of star are we looking at here? Oh, go away. No. There we go. That's a G7 star. I like G stars. Although there are better stars out there. One that I was talking about earlier, and I love bringing up, are K stars. So let's see if we can find one. F, 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 F. Okay, they're gonna be dimmer, so let's try the dimmer ones. K star, there we go, K3, and it even has life too. Actually, I think this is the planet I went to. Yeah, it might have been. Last recording. But either way, K stars are really cool, and yeah, I think this is the planet I went to in the last recording. That's odd. Atmospheric, carbon dioxide, oxygen, sulfur dioxide, ozone, argon, water, and neon. Interesting. Now, K stars are really fascinating because they have the pros of M stars and G stars, minus the cons of M stars and G stars. Because M stars, like Proxima Centauri, as a red dwarf, an M red dwarf, they're incredibly common. They make about 80% of the stars in the Milky Way. And what makes them really cool is they live a very, very long time. On the orders of trillions of years, like that kind of situation. So, life around a planet around a K star has trillions of years to exist. One of the downsides of of M stars, is the habitable zones are very close to the star because they're very dim, and they also tend to be flare stars, so they are prone to undergo flares. And because of this, you have planets that are close to the star when it's undergoing flares. They're going to be stripped of life. It's just how it is. So you could have life on a planet around an M star if it's on the far side, like if it's tidally locked. There's the idea that Proxima b is tidally locked with Proxima Centauri, and if that's the case, life could probably exist on the far side if it had proper conditions. Because the day side is going to be continuously stripped of life when it flares. Now, with G stars, it's a little different because they're far more stable, like our sun, but they're far shorter lived. Like, the sun will only last for about 10 billion years, and that works for us, mind you, but it's still very short compared to the M stars. Now, with K stars, actually we're going to stay in this galaxy because I don't know where to go. With K stars, what's great about them is they have the best of both worlds. because K stars are brighter than M stars, so the habitable zones are farther away. They're also stable, like G stars, like they don't flare generally. So if you have a planet around a K star in the habitable zone, it's very likely to be a stable, safe environment. Granted, it has the proper environment for life to begin with. So if it has a thick atmosphere with liquid water, it could totally support life for a very long time. I don't know exactly how long. It's shorter than dwarf stars, but it's much longer than G stars. So it's like billions and billions and billions longer than what you'll find with the sun. And K stars are also fairly abundant. M stars are the most common, and G stars, they're common enough, but they're not as common. However, K stars are more common than G stars, so you have a situation where you have these really habitable stars that are more common than sun-like stars, but less dangerous than red dwarfs. So I love K-type stars because of this, and I can go on about them for hours. Incidentally, I only have 20 minutes. My throat is not feeling terribly great, but who cares? I don't. A cold desert with unicellular life. Let's go. I was actually reading a paper the other day about, like, it was written by this fellow talking about seeding life on other planets, and he called it the Genesis Project. If you look that up, you're going to find a bunch of biblical stuff, so just keep that in mind. So if you look up like Genesis Project, seeding life kind of thing. Either way, and the whole idea was to find planets that were transiently habitable, so planets that were probably habitable at some point, but are no longer. He used Mars as an example, that Mars was probably very habitable back in the day, but now it doesn't appear to be. And what you do is you find these planets that where life could exist, but life didn't arise or can't arise, and then you seed life on those planets. And I love this idea, I honestly do, because there's two ideas here. If life is common in the universe, then spreading it around wouldn't hurt. It just adds to the abundance. That's nice. But, and this is a really big but, if you're into that. I'm sorry. But if life is very, like, rare in the universe, then it's almost like we have to seed life around, like, the galaxy. Because if life is rare, then wherever life arises, it's almost up to those species to try to find a way to preserve it, because life is very valuable in the universe. So if we go around and we find lifeless planets, and we seed it with Terran life, we're increasing the diversity of life in the universe, and also safeguarding it. Because life is, if it is rare, is highly precious in the universe, and it deserves to be protected and maintained for as long as possible. In fact, there's some people who believe, sometimes crazy, sometimes not, that life on Earth started because, in a similar fashion, where a race much older than us arose first, and then they started seeding life around their local stars, and Earth happened to be one of those, so we were, in a way, a product of guided panspermia. Do I believe that or not? I have absolutely no idea, because there's no evidence for or against it. In fact, technically there's more evidence against it because it requires the existence of aliens, and we haven't found any yet. But if we do find life on other planets, then that goes away, then you're back to there's no evidence for or against it. Which is just interesting all by itself. But either way, I love the idea, because we could theoretically do it soon. However, being able to do it and doing it are two different things. Like, we could build light sails and gigawatt lasers and shoot probes to, like, Proxima Centauri b, but we don't know enough about Proxima b to make that assessment, or to make that judgment call. Because if we, like, let's say we find planets around nearby stars, which we have, and we decide to send Genesis missions out there. Now, without knowing the target planet, we're setting us up for a situation where we might send a mission to seed a habitable world, but then when we get there, life already exists, and then what do you do? We were just here, weren't we? Yeah, we were just here. Ah! Alright. And in that situation, you don't want to seed life on a planet with existing life. That's just rude. It's like claiming land that belongs to somebody else, or colonizing a continent that is already inhabited. It's just rude. So, if you do find, that was a jab by the way, so if you do find planets that have life that already exists, you're not going to transplant Terran life there, unless we're colonizing it, in which case that becomes kind of morally questionable. It's like if you find a planet that has like simple life but no intelligent life, and we just show up, set up a colony, and contaminate with our life, is that good? I don't know. But anyways, back to the topic at hand. Finding a planet that's capable of supporting life but doesn't have life, there's no real issues with transplanting life there. It's kind of like in Star Trek with the Genesis device. This is an interesting planet. Because they couldn't use the Genesis device on a planet with existing life, because it would destroy the life that was there, and that's just a big no-no for Starfleet. Carbon dioxide, water, O2, nitrogen. This is a very complex atmosphere. And then, of course, there's the question, does planetary protection extend beyond Earth, or beyond the solar system? Because we have like, actually a fairly large developed planetary protection protocol for places in our solar system. And this is to protect life that may exist there. For example, Mars. We don't want to contaminate Mars until we've concluded that there either is or is not life there. Because if we go to Mars and contaminate it before we've made that decision, then any life we find might just be contamination, and it ruins the science. So we want to make sure that that we either find life or don't on Mars before contaminating it, because we're gonna contaminate it. I'm sorry, that's just how it is. What's that? Let's go there. But we don't want to contaminate it too soon, and this is why spacecraft going to Mars undergo rigorous planetary protection. And there's differing levels of protection. Even with Mars, like for example, a spacecraft going into orbit around Mars has to reach a certain level of cleanliness in order for it to be able to go there, to minimize chances of contamination in case it crashes. And this does happen. The Mars Climate Orbiter did this because everyone was using metric, but then America was like, we don't understand metric, we're going to use imperial units. And I think it was one of the contractors that was working on it, and they screwed it up, and instead of doing like 5 meters per second, or like, it was like 50 meters per second, it was 50 feet per second, and it basically screwed it up, and it plowed into Mars. Anyways, an orbiter going to orbit around Mars has to reach a certain level of cleanliness to prevent contamination in case of that eventuality, whereas a spacecraft landing on Mars has to reach an even higher level of cleanliness. And this is where it gets kind of tricky, because with modern spacecraft, they're usually very complicated, and they're hard to clean without damaging the electronics. So a lot of times, like for example Curiosity, the interior isn't terribly clean. Like it's clean compared to everything else, but it's still not as clean as the exterior. And what they do is, because it needs to have ventilation to allow heating and cooling, the ventilation, like thermal control shutters, have biofilters on them that don't permit anything, even the smallest spores, from exiting the spacecraft. If there is like microbes in Curiosity, they're not getting out, like, ever. And that's pretty exciting. And if you're doing a mission that's specifically looking for life, then the conditions for cleanliness have to be much higher. And only 2 spacecraft that I know of have reached this level of cleanliness, and that was Viking 1 and 2. Because they were specifically looking for life using life detection things. And what they did was they built the spacecraft, they assembled them, they put them in their aeroshells, and then they put them into an oven and cooked them at like 400 degrees for like a week. And that made them incredibly clean. Like, there would have been no bacteria, no spores. Like, they autoclaved the crap out of it. And that made Viking 1 and 2 probably the cleanest spacecraft to go to Mars. And we can't really do that with modern-day spacecraft, because if you heat them up, you'll damage the delicate electronics. There are some ideas, like using carbon dioxide evaporation, like dry ice basically, to clean, like to sterilize it, or other chemical methods, but really the best way to do it is to build your spacecraft fairly analog and then just oven it. like just autoclave it. And we could probably do that actually. Like, you'd have to pick and choose what instruments can be used, because you can't use like the really complex ones, unfortunately. But if you want to look for life, it doesn't hurt to make simple detection methods and make fairly analog spacecraft that can survive being cooked in an oven, because then you can clean it perfectly and then send it on its way. Whereas a very complex, with very complex electronics, you can't autoclave it, so you have to find other ways of cleaning it, and it gets really complicated really fast. So there you go. Viking 1 and 2 were put in an oven before going to Mars, and they did just fine. So yeah, and even like other places, like Europa, for example. Europa and Enceladus, Terran life can probably exist there, right now, if it wanted to, if we sent it there. And this actually brings up an idea that the habitable zones and the Goldilocks zones of a star should be separate and not the same, because the Goldilocks zone is the point in which a planet can have liquid water on its surface if it has an atmosphere. However, that isn't necessarily needed for life to exist, because Europa and Enceladus are, as far as we know, very habitable to microbiotic life, but they're not in the habitable zone, or the Goldilocks zone. So there's this idea that a habitable zone of a star system doesn't have to be, or shouldn't be, reliant on the Goldilocks zone, because the Goldilocks zone is more for creatures like us that need liquid water on the surface and a dense atmosphere. But for life in general, it can probably exist in far more complicated places. If there's life living in the clouds of Venus, for example, it's kind of on the inside edge of the habitable zone. Actually, I think it's a little bit further in. Life on Mars, it's outside. Life in Europa, Enceladus, Triton, any of those, they're all outside the Goldilocks zone, but life could exist there. So it's really, really interesting to think about that the habitable zone doesn't necessarily mean the habitable zone in general. And that also only means like life that we know it, like carbon-based life. I'm gonna drink my tea because I can't talk right now. And I love it. I love it so much. It's such an interesting topic to talk about. And I'm not finding any life in this galaxy. But yeah, and spacecraft going to Europa would have to be rigorously cleaned. There's an idea to use like a nuclear drill. Ah, there we go. Where it basically heats up and melts through the ice. And you can use that to flash heat the exterior of the probe, and it would sterilize it so that once it entered the water, it wouldn't contaminate it with anything. And even spacecraft landing on the ice, because the ice probably cycles, and there is evidence of resurfacing on Europa. So if a spacecraft lands, boop, on Europa, then in millions of years, there's a chance that it could potentially kind of go through the ice cycles and eventually cycle down through the ice and reach the ocean, where it could contaminate. And if life can survive for millions of years frozen, I'm not sure if it can. Thousands of years, yes. Millions of years, I don't think so. And that's why we can't bring back dinosaurs. I'm sorry. We can backwards engineer them, though, but we can't clone actual dinosaurs. But there's still like that whole idea where it's like you have to make sure that you keep everything clean. And this is why orbiters around the gas giants are always deorbited and crashed into the gas giant planet, because it protects the moons. Galileo was slammed into Jupiter. Cassini was slammed into Saturn. Juno's going to be slammed into Jupiter again. And it's just because if you can't control the attitude of the spacecraft or its orbit, there's a chance that it might collide with one of the ice moons and contaminate it, and we don't want that. So that's incredibly interesting to think about. But outside the solar system, is contamination a good thing? Is it a bad thing? If there's nothing there to contaminate, is it a bad thing to begin with? Like, if we go to Mars and there's literally no Martian life, is bringing life there a good thing or a bad thing? That's a really good question. If there's no life there, I would say it's a good thing, because again, spreading life is good. Now, there's a lot of misanthropic, like, pessimists out there that think humans are bad and we should all kill ourselves, and those people are what I like to call wrong, because misanthropic pessimism solves nothing, and it makes the situation worse. I'm very aggressively gesturing with my hands, but you can't see. So, but it just, don't be that way. We can't fix the world's problems with pessimists. If you just accept that things are bad, we're not going to get anything done. If you accept that things are bad, but hey, we can do something to solve this, that's when things get done. So, cut it with the pessimism. I swear to God, I will find you, and I will lecture you some more. Which I'm sure some people out there might actually like that, so who knows. In fact, I'm pretty sure a lot of people watch these videos, like, tabbed out, and they just hear me talk, which is totally fine. I do the exact same thing, so if you're one of those people, have at it. You can't see what's going on right now. Not that anything is actually going on, I'm just being distracted. My hands, I talk with my hands, so I keep forgetting to actually, like, point and click and use the keyboard. But whatever. So that's been 20 minutes, and this time my mic was not muted, so I can actually use this footage. And it was actually a very good episode. I'm actually quite pleased with that. It covered a lot of interesting topics. I was going to talk about some airsoft stuff, because I have some updates on that, but time ran out, so I'll do that later. And also game updates, but again, later. But anyways, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you have suggestions for things to talk about, let me know. Places to go, I'll go literally anywhere. In the game, not in real life. I have a hard time even just being in a car for 20 minutes because of agoraphobia, so in the game I'll go anywhere. Don't make me leave my house, please. Actually, I may have found a place where I can launch my rocket. But the land, I think, is owned by a church, and I asked them a question, and I'm waiting to hear back from their pastor to see if I can use it or not. But I'll keep you apprised on that. So, thank you all for watching, I hope you enjoyed, and space.